Imagine you're walking down a narrow road. What would keep you safe and not wander off down any side path? Well, if there were guardrails on either side, that would certainly help, wouldn't they? The first disciples of Jesus, they had guardrails, not physical ones, but teachings. On the one side stood the Didache, a guide for the community. And we have had a good summary of that in past videos. On the other, they had the Gospel of Thomas. Now, this was a set of sayings that helped with personal discovery and self-examinations. So, together, they gave balance to those who followed the way Jesus directed them to. So the first guardrail, the Didache means teaching, and it claimed to preserve the teachings of the 12 apostles handed down from Jesus himself. Practical? Certainly, as you would expect from any handbook, which is what the Didache is. It begins with the two ways, the way of life and the way of death, and it contains instructions on how to baptize, how to fast and pray, and how to share in the Lord's Supper. It even gives guidance on appointing leaders, prophets and bishops and deacons, or today elders, ministerial servants, and so on. Now, we briefly summarized it in the last video. What's striking is how close this feels to the Sermon on the Mount. Love your neighbor. Bless those who curse you. Keep your speech honest. Care for the poor. See, the Didache shows us how the early communities put Jesus' words into practice in their daily lives. The other guardrail was the Gospel of Thomas. It's not a story like we find in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. No. And here is the link to download it. It's the Early Christian Writings, earlychristianwritings.com. Well, it's a collection of 114 sayings. There are no miracles, no passion narrative, just words of Jesus passed down. Now, some of these sayings match the Gospels we know. The kingdom, for example, is like a mustard seed. We find that Thomas saying, number 20. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Again, another saying from Thomas, 62. Others, though, sound quite different. For example, saying number 3, the kingdom is within you and all around you, but people do not see it. Or saying number 1, whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death. Now, what would Jesus have meant by that? Well, he explained those sayings privately, and we will deal with that very subject separately. However, what is noticeable is that Thomas pushes towards the inner self. It is less about rules and rituals, more about recognizing the light within ourselves, about understanding Jesus' words for oneself. It's personal, in other words. It's encouraging self-reflection. And there is another question to ponder. Right up until even today, the founders of the Christian Church has always been recognized as who? The Apostle Peter. And we've taken the scriptural basis for this understanding as found in the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 16 and verses 18 and 19, we've taken that, our understanding, where Jesus said, "And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on the earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on the earth will be loosed in heaven." Yet, in the book of Acts, and indeed Paul's letters, it's the Apostle James, Jesus' brother, who is recognized as the head of the early church or congregation. So, did James usurp Peter's leadership? Or is there another explanation? Well, we find that in the Gospel of Thomas, and it clears the whole matter up. In saying number 12, we read, "The disciples said to Jesus, 'We know that you are going to leave us. Who will be our leader?' Jesus said to them, 'No matter where you are to go to James the Just, for whose sake heaven and earth came into being.'" Well, that seems clear enough, does it not? However, that leaves us with another question. Is our understanding of Matthew chapter 16 verse 18 correct? And if not, how should we understand those words of Jesus? Or another way is to ask, what was in the mind of Jesus when he informed his disciples of how matters were going to turn out? Now, this will be investigated in another video very shortly. However, what seems very probable is that this Gospel of Thomas was in circulation before the other Gospels and indeed Paul's letters were written. And once again, this conclusion can be arrived at from simply the internal evidence. So, having covered these points, what do we have? Well, we have two guardrails: the Didache, shaping the outer life, the community, its worship and practice. And on the other hand, we have the Gospel of Thomas, shaping the inner life, the search for wisdom and awakening. And together, they gave the early disciples a balance on the road of following Jesus' direction. Now, what we need is to get some more context and backdrop into our understanding of the way the early disciples followed through on the directions and the teachings of Jesus. So in the next video, coming up on Thursday, using these two guardrails, we will go further. See, we will compare these two guardrails with the four Gospels and see how all of them can together create a stabilizing picture of the early Jesus movement. So, until then, if you have found this information helpful, please like, subscribe, and share. And thank you.